Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Hydrogen Full Court Press Global Interview Series, where we take a deeper dive into this hydrogen opportunity. Full court press in the sense where all these stakeholders that we're seeing amongst the region, across the Middle East, as well as globally, are looking to be a part of this opportunity. I'm lucky to be joined here today by two distinguished speakers, Dr. Julio Friedman, Senior Research Scholar at the Center of Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, School of International and Public Affairs, as well as Robin Mills, CEO of K-Mart Energy. Thank you guys very much for joining us today. I appreciate it. I just wanted to start with Dr. Julio to get your insights. Of course, you've just released a publication on the opportunities for the UAE and the hydrogen economy. Can you just elaborate on that and where you see really the UAE's competitive advantages in this space?
Absolutely, and it's a delight to be here with Robin, my co-author. Let's start with the obvious. The United Arab Emirates has extraordinary natural resources and extraordinary assets. The natural resources include not just renewable resources for production of green hydrogen, but also excellent CO2 storage resources for the production of blue hydrogen, and with those green and blue products, ammonia and synthetic fuels and the like. But they also have extraordinary assets. By assets, I don't just mean conventional hydrocarbon assets, but they have ports, they have human capital, they have excellent regulatory structure. All of these things make it much more likely that they can produce and ship and sell large volumes of low carbon hydrogen products in a short amount of time.
Robin, if you can just elaborate on that, of course, based here in the mix of everything, the UAE just announced their net zero pledge. Where do you see the UAE positioning itself amongst this global opportunity for hydrogen?
Right, thanks, Brian. Look, I think the net zero pledge of the UAE is extremely important and quite groundbreaking, obviously, for the first Middle East country to do so and the first major non-OECD oil and gas exporter to make such a commitment. And, you know, for me, that's a vote of confidence like across the whole decarbonisation spectrum. And obviously, for the UAE to reach net zero will mean a massive expansion of nuclear power, which is already underway, renewable energy, improvements in energy efficiency and industrial efficiency, electric vehicles, carbon capture and storage. But I think hydrogen is a very key part of that mix. Firstly, because it plays a key role in decarbonising the domestic economy. There are some large industries in the UAE, particularly petrochemicals, fertilizers, refining, steel. Those are all obvious industries that could benefit very much from using hydrogen. And then, of course, because the UAE is of course, a major oil and gas exporter, and looking ahead to a global net zero future, obviously there's a need to either use hydrocarbons in a non-emitting way and or replace them with non-emitting products such as hydrogen and its derivatives. So that also gives the UAE confidence that yes, it can have a strong economic future even in a world moving towards net zero.
And with that, what do you see as the biggest challenges in taking the next step? You know, I would say talks are one thing, implementation is really the big step. What do you think is the challenges that need to be addressed and kind of the speed bumps that you see along the road ahead for the UAE?
Well, I think really building the market, and I think this is the challenge for all hydrogen projects, you know, globally. There are a number of key regions which are looking very seriously at using hydrogen. Obviously, Europe, Japan, probably the outstanding ones, maybe South Korea, and others will probably join them. But you know, at the moment, hydrogen, whether green or blue, is substantially more expensive than so-called grey hydrogen made without carbon capture and storage, and it's more expensive. Let's say in normal times, we're living through a bit of a price spike, but in normal times, it's more expensive than natural gas. So there has to be that premium on a low carbon option, and of course that can be a European carbon price, but even then there needs to be something else to close the gap and enable us to build up the hydrogen industry to bring down costs so that it becomes a competitive option. And I think you'll see all of the major projects that are being launched around the world to produce hydrogen are reliant on having a very credible large off-taker, whether that's an industry, a utility, or whether that's a national commitment, as in the UAE. I think that there'll be increasing use of hydrogen in the domestic economy.
And Dr. Julio, I just want to bring you back in, discussing blue and green hydrogen. We've had some conversations with our stakeholders, some investment companies in Europe as well as the Middle East, especially Europe, saying that green hydrogen is the only way, and they're not even looking at blue hydrogen. How do you see those two aspects complement each other, especially when considering the Middle East moving forward in this space?
Right now, of course, Europe as a political entity and many nations in Europe, including the United Kingdom and Germany and the Netherlands, are very much taking a mixed approach. They think they will need both blue and green hydrogen. And the most important thing is to actually focus on the life cycle carbon emissions. The footprint is the thing that determines if it's clean. If you made green hydrogen using grid electricity, it would be quite awful, actually. It would emit quite a lot more. For blue hydrogen, there's very real concerns about things like the upstream methane emissions and whether or not there's upstream leakage and flaring and these kinds of things. In both cases, the United Arab Emirates is extremely well positioned. Because of the nature of the present infrastructure, leakage is very low. And so the blue hydrogen could be very low footprint. And the green hydrogen, again, there's dedicated renewables. The grid is quite clean. So while people may have concerns about the nature of blue hydrogen, I think if you are clear-eyed and determined about the need to keep the life cycle footprint low, then it should absolutely compete. There's one last thing I want to say about the green and the blue hydrogen. Today, the green hydrogen costs almost everywhere in the world are substantially more expensive than blue hydrogen. That will eventually change. Green hydrogen eventually will be much cheaper than it is today and probably will be cheaper than blue hydrogen. Today, however, we are having a hard time scaling green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen we can scale very quickly at very large volumes, both by retrofitting existing plants or by building very large new plants. There was a plant announced in Louisiana just yesterday that's a $4.5 billion facility with air products that would capture and store 4.5 million tons a year of CO2, has 95% capture rate, so very low life cycle footprint. So these things are possible, and I'm glad to see that broadly the market is doing that. If so, that will make it quite easy for the United Arab Emirates to take part in those markets.
And when you say scaling, what do you see as the biggest challenges towards scaling? Is it financing? Is it getting stakeholders on board to understand the opportunity? What do you think is the biggest issue at the moment?
I want to go back to something that Robin had said. There is not that much market pull yet. There's a couple of jurisdictions, Japan, Korea, Europe, where there is some credible market pull that will need to come into place to get the financing. But there's real
headlines though at the moment. There's a lot of headlines at the moment though from the region, of course.
There's a lot of headlines. There's a lot of punchlines too.
Yeah.
The challenge though is not just the financing. Right now, the largest operating green hydrogen project in the world makes 2.5 tons a day. The largest blue hydrogen project makes over 1,000 tons a day. There is not a manufacturing base yet for electrolyzers, and their costs are still high. So the cost of the electrolyzer has to come down and the manufacturing base has to come down. There will be choke points in the infrastructure, both for blue and green, for transmission build-out infrastructure as well as CO2 storage infrastructure. There's not enough of either of those. So apart from the fact that there's no infrastructure, there's no manufacturing and no market, everything's perfect. So I think it'll be a while before we sort these things out. Again, my belief is that the United Arab Emirates can contribute positively to all of those challenges. And ultimately, it doesn't matter whether I'm pessimistic or optimistic, the work is going to be the same. We still need to deploy these things. We need to deploy them rapidly. We need to deploy them at scale. And that's why the investment opportunity and market opportunity is so promising.
And Robin, just to build on that scalability, where do you see current, carbon capture is a big, I would say, pillar of the strategy here in the Middle East. Where do you see current technology in that space today? And is it on pace to make things more scalable at the moment?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to carbon capture, right, I'm really not so concerned about the scalability of it, right? I think if you're talking about carbon capture from a large industrial facility, and that can be a blue hydrogen production facility. It can be a fertilizer plant, a refinery, a power plant. There's all kind of infrastructure. They all have their own requirements for carbon capture and the precise method. But these are very large facilities. I think, and the global projects that have been done in carbon capture, there was one in 𝗥𝗏𝗍 capturing 800,000 tons of CO2 a year. There's a large one on gas processing in Saudi Arabia. And there's various others planned in Qatar and UAE, which will go up to 5 to 7 million tons a year. So they're already existing and planned at a large scale. The challenge is, if we talk about the Gulf in particular, the challenges really relate to again, bringing down the costs to getting the repeatability and the experience of these projects, which are large industrial engineering projects. The challenges here are different from those in Europe and the US, and particularly in Europe, where a lot more, yes, cost of course is a big factor, but also a lot relates to public acceptability, and that has got in the way of projects previously. That's not really a problem in the Gulf, where there's wide acceptance of the oil and gas industry and its related industries, and the other conditions here, the geological conditions for geological storage in the Middle East of CO2 over very long time scales are very favorable.
And I just want to shift a little bit too, as this becomes established here in the Middle East. How do you see hydrogen being exported? So we've touched on this briefly in the past with other dialogues and conversations. But what do you think is the next step and how they export this clean fuel in a sense?
That's a really important challenge. I think if you look at hydrogen produced and for kind of local use, so at the moment, most hydrogen is made basically in and around the plant that is using it, and whether it's a refinery or a fertilizer plant, typically. Hydrogen as a commodity, as a traded commodity, barely exists to some extent in the US, but it doesn't really exist as a commodity today, and it's going to have to become a commodity. Now, how much is then produced and exported, and how it's exported is really a key question, and I think we're going to see a diversity of methods. So where there is a pipeline, and particularly where there's an existing gas pipeline can be converted to use hydrogen, to carry hydrogen at perhaps 10% of the cost of building a new pipeline. So existing pipelines and decarbonising by going from gas to hydrogen will be quite favourable. And that would apply to like North Africa in particular, which has existing pipelines to Europe and can make hydrogen with solar and wind in North Africa. The UAE doesn't have that luxury at the moment. It's not connected to Europe or to Asia by pipelines, and those would be over very long distances. So we're really looking at shipping methods. And I think the key question there is, will we be shipping hydrogen as a liquefied or compressed form, but as hydrogen? Will we be combining it chemically with something else that it can be?
How do you see the cost for shipping methods at the moment? I imagine that technology is still in development and pretty high cost as well.
Yeah, I mean, dedicated hydrogen carriers are still, really at a pilot stage. But I think what is very much a short-term option is shipping ammonia. Ammonia is already regularly shipped around the world, very well-established technology, and can be used either directly or converted back to hydrogen at the point of use.
Dr. Julio, I just want to bring you back in if you want to add on to that and how you see hydrogen in terms of, especially from the Middle East perspective as well, in terms of exporting it and adding value from that aspect.
Exactly. My sensibility here is that you're not going to be exporting a crude product. You're going to be exporting a finished good. Something like ammonia is a finished good. Synthetic methanol is a finished good. Low carbon steel made with hydrogen is a finished good. That's quite different than currently sort of exporting commodities in that same way. But the potential upside of that is, of course, the value of the finished product is quite a bit higher. In terms of the shipping, of course, shipping a finished good is easier. Liquefied hydrogen is extremely difficult and expensive to ship. There's not a lot of maritime architecture to move it or receive it or all these things. As Robin said, ammonia is quite different. We move 180 million tons of ammonia every year. And in fact, the pressure and temperature is like LPG. It's like shipping propane around. And shipping methanol is like shipping gasoline around. Shipping steel is like shipping steel. Like, we know how to move those other finished goods in a much easier way. and where infrastructure and ports are ready to receive them.
And Robin, just wanting to bring you back into things, where do you see international partnerships playing a role in, one, the production of hydrogen and the exportation of hydrogen? Of course, the Middle East is pushing more with this aspect, but do you see that accelerating? We're going into COP26. Do you think that there's going to be kind of a spark to the powder keg moving forward this next year coming ahead?
Yes, sure. Look, and I think when Julio earlier mentioned the advantages of the UAE for hydrogen, I think the international partnership side is one key one of that. The UAE has always had strong international partnerships, and its oil and gas sector has continued to have very close relationships with a whole range of international oil companies. So, I see on the partnership side, firstly, there's the corporate partnerships, and you've seen deals with companies like Siemens, for example, for hydrogen production. Those will be very important for locking in customers for hydrogen, so creating that market that we were talking about. And then the other side of it is the international cooperation. So again, we've seen government to government level deals with Japan, for example. I think we may see some of those with Europeans as well. And those are important for setting the parameters for the international hydrogen business, and questions like, what's the carbon footprint, or what's an acceptable carbon footprint? How will we distinguish green and blue? Will they all be acceptable? And for setting the parameters within which this market is going to emerge and develop.
And Dr. Julio, a big foundation that builds this entire market up, of course, is the talent that can help support it. Where do you see initiatives at the moment that will support talent needed for the hydrogen economy? The big thing in the Middle East, of course, is providing job opportunities, skill sets, and so forth. But of course, being at Columbia University, are you seeing a big push in this space to, ensure that students acquire a skill set and ensure that, those opportunities are being put forward for the future?
It is always the case that human resources are the scarcest of all. And in that context, yes, the university is actually embarking on programs in which students do more practicums, they do more bench laboratory work and so forth, in order to really understand what hydrogen is, how it's made, how it's used, how it moves into markets. And that's true in the business school, that's true in the engineering school, that's true in the law school. Everyone's looking at hydrogen and have seen the same thing happening around the world. Thankfully, some of the human capital we have is ready to go. The people who do oil and gas production are the same people who can do blue hydrogen and geological storage. A lot of the people who are doing desalination projects and electrification of things could also do electrolyzers and green hydrogen production. And eventually the people who are trading crude are people who will be trading finished goods. And so I think everybody is excited about hydrogen in part because they can see themselves in a hydrogen future. And we can build on the existing human capital we have as we really put our shoulder into developing the next generation.
And Robin, just to build on that, where do you see the hydrogen market in terms of the opportunity for adding value to the labor market, in a sense, job opportunities and progression in that space?
I think that's a very important question when it comes to the UAE in particular, and that's I think a key reason why the UAE is interested in hydrogen. So, producing hydrogen as a raw material and then converting that perhaps into, whether it's steel or ammonia, some other products, that is a very capital intensive process, but not a particularly human intensive process. It's like the oil and gas industry. The real value, I think, comes from all the supporting industries and services and spin-offs. And a lot of the big part of capturing the hydrogen opportunity is to make the most of that, and to think where can the national economy add value? How do you create a hydrogen ecosystem? And there's a whole range of services we've mentioned, from legal to finance to technical training and skills to trading. So that's one big area of stuff which is not dealing with the nitty-gritty, the steel and the pipes of the facilities, but all the services around it. There's then a manufacturing opportunity. Now, how much that comes to the Gulf region, that's a question, but there will be a lot of manufacturing of these systems. And then there's the downstream uses. So, we've talked quite a lot about export of hydrogen, but, the UAE has substantial and developing value chains for instance, in petrochemicals, and many of the Gulf countries have tried to go further downstream in petrochemicals, and there's the opportunity to do that. So, for example, to add value to methanol by producing a whole range of derivatives from that. So there's a lot to discover, I think, here in terms of how much value the hydrogen economy can add beyond simply getting a million acres of desert and building a solar farm and putting an electrolyzer on it.
And as we, it seems that 20 minutes goes by pretty quickly, but as we wrap up, what are you looking for over the coming year? You know, COP26 coming up, where you're starting to see really the turn of the dial in the hydrogen space here in the Middle East. Are there any key signals that you're watching at the moment?
For me, absolutely the key is to get an investment decision on some of these large proposed hydrogen projects, whether blue or green, and to see that they have credible off-takers. Whether those are domestic off-takers, there will be some initially, and international off-takers. And again, whether that's off-takers of hydrogen or probably more likely ammonia to start with. So that's really the key. Then these projects are real, and by 2025, 26, we could see some very large real operating projects of hundreds of thousands of tons per year, you know, world scale things costing billions of dollars, and that will already give the industry some reality.
And Dr. Julio, just building on that, you know, in terms of investments, where do you see really, or what do you see needs to be done in order to incentivize more investments in the space, draw more investments to this region for hydrogen? And what are you looking for this next year that will really signal to you that that dial has turned at the moment?
We're really starting to see an uptick of investment in other countries. We're really seeing in the United States, in the UK, in the EU, we're starting to see Singapore and Japan really get into the hydrogen production and transportation business. So one of the questions is, will the United Arab Emirates keep up? There's actually a lot going on in the world. This is a competitive landscape now in a way that no one had imagined 3 years ago. But I would say that, back to Robin's point, this is really a team sport. The most important thing here is going to be building partnerships, building commercial agreements, setting standards. Like, those are the things that are really going to make the market evolve quickly and give people the confidence that their investments will return.
Well, thank you, Dr. Julio. Thank you, Robin, for joining us, of course, in this interview today. For those who are watching, feel free to follow them on social media. Of course, you can find the report online, the UAE's role in the global hydrogen economy, where you can have more deeper insights into this opportunity. And of course, follow Gulf Intelligence, where we will publish this interview and harvest content throughout. But thank you, Dr. Julio. Thank you, Robin, for joining. Appreciate your insights today.
Thank you, Brian.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.